Sean Kingston was charged yesterday for being a fraudster. Those beautiful girls must not have liked him because they knew he was up to no good. Sean Kingston and his mother found guilty of wire fraud. These two will be sentenced on July 11th and could face decades in prison. He apparently has been on house arrest until his sentencing. What a fall from grace. This is a dude who experienced immediate success in the music industry. Sean was discovered on YouTube, and not long after, in 2007, his song Beautiful Girls was released. The song peaked near the top of the Billboard charts, and it helped him land gigs with popular artists you may have heard. He was the opening act for Gwen Stefani's The Sweet Escape tour. He opened for Beyonce on a few shows. In 2008, he opened for a few of Kelly Clarkson's shows. I was able to find many legal documents that cover his story of being a musician turned fraudster, and it was much worse than I initially thought. This is so embarrassing for a guy who at one point appeared ready for superstardom. He was even featured on a song on Justin Bieber's album My World 2.0. Apparently, he recently helped write Chris Brown's song Sensational that won a Grammy. This fraud scheme by Sean included his mom, which I think makes them the first contestants on our new game show called Family Fraud. Sean Kingston and his mother found guilty on all 5 federal charges against them. Janice Turner now in federal custody. Kingston was crying and telling agents to protect my mother. Right before last year's arrest, he was promoting her brand Mama Kingston sauce on Instagram. Turner was immediately taken into custody after the verdict, with the judge citing her past criminal history and role in the scheme as key factors in his decision. He described her as the operator, fixer, and accountant behind the fraudulent activity. I didn't see the news stories last year during the arrest, so this was all new to me, but I looked far back to see if he had any previous scams, and here's what I found. In August 2011, Sean received a judgment in the amount of $37,932.85 from a complaint filed by Hymov Jewelers, Inc., doing business as Hymov Watches, Inc. Sean's address at the time was 12442 Grand Oaks Drive in Davie, Florida. Using my favorite app, Batch Leads, I can see here that Sean Kingston Enterprise Inc. was in a contract for sale of this $1 million property in 2008. I went to Fort Lauderdale's property records to search out of curiosity, and it appears that there wasn't an official sale, but a contract was recorded, so he might have never actually bought it after going under contract. Anyway, the point is, he was living in a $1 million house and clearly didn't pay a jeweler around $35,000 for what was probably the sale of a nice watch. I assume that because of his history of doing just this. A year later, Sean received a judgment in the amount of nearly $53,000 from a complaint filed by Catherine Arrighi. I wasn't able to find the complaint, but I find it fascinating how Sean was collaborating with Justin Bieber at the same time he couldn't pay people what was owed. 2 years later, in August 2014, Sean was sued by Avi the Jeweler Inc., a New York corporation known for custom-made jewelry. Avi Davidov claims to have had a decade-long friendship with Sean. This close friendship allowed Sean to get more favorable pricing and extended credit terms. If you hear those words in a complaint, then you know the defendants massively took advantage of a friendship. From November 2008 to September 2013, Avi the Jeweler sold and delivered jewelry to Kingston and all of his business entities for which plaintiff has been refused or withheld to the plaintiff. The first invoice around November 19, 2008 was for $100,000 for 5 different expensive pieces of jewelry. Sean traded in a Breitling watch worth around $15,000 in order to reduce the amount owed to just $85,000. Sean still owes around $15,000 from this specific invoice though. In April 2009, Sean was sold custom jewelry and had an invoiced amount of $150,000. If you ever wanted an example of why people go broke, buying $150,000 worth of custom jewelry is a great example. It's not the expense of jewelry that's the problem, it's the fact that it's custom with his specific initials on it, meaning you can only sell it for a fraction of the value many years later. No part has been paid, leaving a balance of $150,000 from this invoice. Sean needed $5,000 for the installation of diamonds on a piece of jewelry, which was never paid. In December 2012, Sean bought $63,000 worth of jewelry and still owes $43,000. In July 2013, Sean bought $159,000 worth of jewelry, which he returned not long after, except item number 6, a belly button chain. He still owes $1,200 for the belly button chain, which has to be the dumbest product I've ever heard of. Nothing says broke baller like having jewelry in your belly button that you can't even afford. He owes Avi $214,200. Protecting yourself from fraudsters like Sean Kingston may be difficult, but protecting yourself from online fraudsters can be easy with today's sponsor, Aura. My account receives alerts every day notifying me of all the ways scammers might be trying to find my passwords or personal information. One way they can do this is by buying your information off data broker websites. Data brokers are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you, like where you live, which is a little terrifying. Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do. Let Aura handle it for you. In 2024, the national public data was breached, exposing our most sensitive information, phone numbers, address, social security numbers, all released to whoever wants them, and worst of all, they were released for free. They recommend those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the national public data breach, I wouldn't worry because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. Aura wants you to protect your private information, which is why they're offering my audience a 14-day free trial. Go to aura.com/Spencer to get a 14-day free trial. How amazing is that? I found something really funny with this story though. Here's one of the sales orders for Sean in the amount of $325,000. I noticed that the payment terms were for 2 days, which means this was actually him just borrowing the jewelry. What would you need that much jewelry for? He rented the jewelry for his appearance on the popular TV show 106 & Park. Wow, that guy must be rich with all that flashy jewelry. If you didn't know, you can literally rent jewelry for a couple days for your photo shoots or TV appearances, and in Sean's case, not return it so you can appear wealthy. Here's one of the checks Sean wrote in the amount of $30,000 for jewelry bounced for insufficient funds. In August 2020, Avi received a judgment against Sean in the amount of $356,352.50. The lawyer Sean hired around the filing by Avi ultimately filed a complaint against Sean in May 2015, alleging Sean had an unpaid bill of around $15,000. My guess is Sean's public status as a musician with popular songs on Spotify is how he was able to essentially scam all these people in his life. It seems like he never pays anyone. A year later, in March 2016, Heimoff Jewelers LLC sued Sean again. The complaint alleges Sean bought a yellow Rolex but never paid in full for it. Later that year, Heimoff Jewelers was able to win a judgment of $44,000 against Sean. If you saw him on TV with all that jewelry, you probably wouldn't have guessed that he was stiffing everyone providing the watches and chains. In August 2016, Aqua Master Enterprise Inc., doing business as Aqua Master Watch, sued Sean and his entities Janice Turner and Mama Kingston's Kitchen Inc. Generally, when this type of fraud occurs, the mom is interviewed at the courthouse steps and she is so confused as to how her perfect little Shawnee Poo could have committed such crimes. But in this story, which is the first time I've seen something like this, she seems to have been involved. This plaintiff alleges that Sean and his mom used their business entities to purposely obtain jewelry with the preconceived plan to not pay for the goods. Sean visited the plaintiff in New York and selected 9 high-end jewelry items he wanted to purchase. He told the jeweler, "Don't worry, my business manager will wire the money." A guy of his public status probably led the guy to believe him. Instead, Sean took possession of the jewelry and then switched up the plan and wrote checks. Those checks were deposited into the Aqua Master's bank accounts by Sean and his mom, so everything was good, right? The plaintiff thought the funds were wired and Bank of America verified $301,500 was recently debited to the account. The jeweler, thinking the funds were wired, let go of the jewelry to Sean and his mom. But the next day, the bank notified him that the funds weren't in the account because the debited amount came from checks and not a wire transfer. The checks essentially bounced because of insufficient funds. No part of the $302,500 purchase price had been paid except for $1,000. Here's a check from Sean's business account for $270,000 that didn't have the funds. And here's his mom's check for $31,500 that didn't have the funds either. The following summer, Sean ran into some legal trouble that wasn't jewelry related. Christopher Gregory Brito filed a claim in small claims court against Sean and his mom. I found a Christopher Brito Instagram account claiming to be a security guard. I put this address into Google Maps and did a route search to the address listed in the small claims case. They're only 9.3 miles away from each other. So the odds of this guy being the same guy, I would say, are pretty high. If it is the same guy, then a security guard filing a small claim against Sean and his mom probably means they stiffed him on a paycheck. Not enough for a lawsuit with a lawyer, but enough where he wants to be recouped. In February 2023, Dreamwatch SBN BHD, a Malaysian company, sued Sean. They alleged that Sean contacted them on Instagram wanting some, can you guess it by now? That's right, some jewelry that he probably didn't want to pay for. The two watches were Richard Mille and Patek Philippe. I probably mispronounced those names because I'm about as good at naming watches as Sean is at paying people back. This was his biggest scam yet. The watches were priced at $912,000. Sean had been training for nearly a decade to make a big heist on this poor Malaysian jeweler. The guy flies all the way to Sean's Encino, California house because he probably believes Sean is a legitimate baller. I mean, he has a song with Justin Bieber. Sean likes the watches, agrees to the price of $912,000, takes possession of the watches, and totally told the truth about sending the money. I bet you all can guess how he said he'd send the money. Of course, the $912,000 would be wired the following day. The money, of course, didn't arrive, and Sean had an excuse. It was the bank rejected the wire because of the large amount, and the money was being sent internationally. couple days later, the next excuse was that the account had been frozen. He said his account was frozen for the next 3 months, and then Sean just stopped responding to the plaintiff entirely. A hilarious side note in this complaint is that 4 days after buying $912,000 worth of watches, the plaintiffs alleged that he asked for a $4,000 loan for something totally unrelated. Instead of thinking this was a major red flag, they just assumed Mr. Celebrity Musician would just add the $4,000 to the wire he'd send for the watches. Sean ultimately just ignored the plaintiff, which led to this complaint. How to scam your way to wearing $1 million worth of jewelry. Dream Watch was able to receive a $916,000 judgment against Sean for the jewelry and small loan. Just when you think he couldn't get any dumber and scammier, we have the next complaint filed just 2 months later. This time it's Roundhill Music and Artist Rights Management LLC. Basically, Sean sold off 50% of his future royalties to this fund. Why would you do that? Well, you can take a big upfront payment in exchange for the royalties you may receive over time. In Sean's case, you would think he'd take the payment to pay off his debts, but of course that isn't what he did. They gave Sean $415,000 for 50% of his royalties. They file a UCC statement as seen here. I don't know the exact process, but they essentially notify a clearinghouse that they hold the rights and the royalties should be distributed to them. They ultimately proposed an order for an $85,000 judgment against Sean, so what happened? Apparently business was running just fine until Sean decided to notify the clearinghouse years later that Roundhill Fund had no authority to receive his royalties, which led to this dispute. I want to point out that while he was scamming people, this is the house in Encino, California he was living in. Right after Fraud Boy started running into legal trouble, the house sold for $3.6 million. The final complaint came a year later by Ver Entertainment. This time it was regarding a 232-inch colossal television. We've uncovered that Sean lies about how he'll pay, typically with fake checks and wire transfers, but he offered something other than money. Even though it was a decade later, Sean claimed to still have a working relationship with an A-list musician. To induce plaintiff to accept a much lower down payment and credit towards the purchase price, Sean promised plaintiff that he would produce promotional videos of plaintiff's cooperation with Justin Bieber. This has to be a new level of influencer going broke, where you're trying to convince a television sales company that you'll get a celebrity to film a commercial for their company. Sean wired $30,000 to the company in order for them to get started on producing the TV. At least Sean made some progress with actually sending a down payment, but it always seems like it's the following payment that mysteriously disappears, so let's see if he paid them in full. Defendant then began providing a litany of excuses as to why payment wasn't made. In a shocker to no one who's watched this far, Sean lied about having a check, lied about being able to pay, and never paid in full, which leads us to the recent news story. Here's his arrest report in June 2024. He was arrested in Rancho Cucamonga, California, and sent back to Broward County, Florida. 10 different charges, all carrying a $10,000 bond.
We were there as the well-known artist Southwest Ranch's rental home was raided in May of 2024, and we watched as luxury cars, jewelry, and high-priced tech items were seized.
I found his 8,000 square foot Fort Lauderdale house on Zillow. The lot is nearly 2.5 acres, which is not big enough to avoid police seizure of personal property. The house is currently for sale now that the tenant is likely headed to jail soon. Almost $6 million can land you this beautiful property.
Christy and Louie, today we got a chance to hear from a car salesman, a luxury watch salesman who say they were both duped by Kingston and his mother when they were provided fake wire transfer receipts and never paid for their products. Wednesday, the government calling car salesman Andre Bush to testify, who claims to have met with Kingston at his Southwest Ranch's rental home to sell him a Cadillac Escalade. Bush testifying he was given a fake wire transfer receipt and never received the funds, but when he attempted to take the luxury SUV back to the dealership, he said Kingston became aggravated and refused to release it. Only after receiving a down payment of $20,000 was the vehicle left at the home.
It takes a clever scammer in order to get one over on a car salesman, but Sean clearly knew how to deceive others. Here's another instance of him doing just that.
A luxury watch salesman from Mazal Jewelers testifying he released a $285,000 watch similar to this one when he said he was promised future celebrity clients.
He probably alluded to his non-existent close personal friendship with Justin Bieber in order to get a discount on the watches, like he did with the TV.
So Sean Kingston chose not to testify. His own attorney, though, painting him as a kid who spends too much money, a kid who isn't even aware of how much money he has, of how all of that works, and that his mother is a protective mother. They're insisting right now that what happened here were civil disagreements and not an intention to defraud.
The behavior over the past decade shows someone clearly having an intent to deceive. I have a feeling the jury and judge could see right through this bogus explanation of Sean's actions.
In closing arguments, federal prosecutors shared dozens of text messages between mother and son as proof. Specifically, mom worried he had no money for all these jewelers. writing, "What's up with you and all this jewelry, bro? Focus on your craft," according to prosecutors. He responds in another message, "Mother, you don't listen to me, and I told you to make a fake receipt." She says, "Please screenshot and send it to him."
Thankfully, in court, everything gets exposed, so they finally had to deal with the final boss, who can reprimand them for their fraudulent actions.
The defense saying that some of the payments were made, some of the goods were given back, but prosecutors are arguing that doesn't change that this happened. There are 33 fake receipts of wire transfers.
Doing this once may have led to a light penalty, but 33 times in all the lawsuits I've shared with you show a mother and son who's had an intent to deceive everyone in their life. May they rot in prison for a long, long time. Thanks for watching.